both the choices of the perpetrator who inflicts violence and the choices of those of us who stand by and do nothing. The horror and heroics of human choice in the struggle for justice and human rights has been the school of life that I have been pretty much attending since I finished being beaten up here at Dartmouth 30 years ago. The first introduction to that world was right as I was graduating, 1985. You might remember this is when the apartheid crisis was beginning to really take a violent, deep descent. I went over there in 1985 to begin to try and actually work with church leaders in their struggle to try to move South Africa into a post-apartheid era. So in 1985, when I arrived, I was there for 3 days, and then martial law was declared in the country, just because of the levels of violence. It was actually illegal to say Nelson Mandela's name in a public place at that time. And every week, if you were here in America, you would see what you wouldn't see on the news in South Africa, which was the violence and brutality every day in the townships. And in that context, I saw the tremendous drama of choices. Those who chose to participate in a regime of just pure racial oppression. Choices of some young white men I knew who were being drafted into the security forces, and would they go? Decisions of young black South Africans about whether or not they would flee the country and join rebel forces, or they would be part of the struggle in the townships. The choices of leaders in the community, like Bishop Tutu, who I got to spend a good bit of that year with, just watching as a young student as he responded to the horror of violence, and especially to do so as a follower of Jesus. Another profound experience of this drama of choices around the struggle for justice and human rights was then in the Philippines. When I was in law school to my second and third year, I was sent by the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights to the Philippines to figure out why the new president, Cory Aquino, was unable to control the Marcos police and military that she inherited, who were committing mass murders, assassinations, disappearances. I had actually met Ninoy Aquino at a time when he was a visiting fellow at Harvard University, and he met with a few of us who were sharing the Christian faith on campus because he just wanted to share his experience of having met Jesus in prison. And then we watched about a year and a half later, as everyone did in 1983 on television, as he flew back to the Philippines with the cameras on the airplane and gets off the plane. And his people warned that the Marcos regime would not tolerate his return. And he was shot right there and murdered on the tarmac. And to understand the choices that were involved for him in deciding that he was called to go back home to his nation under circumstances in which he knew he was also choosing the likelihood of his own death. This was not an abstraction for me because I actually had gotten to know the person. So then years later, quite dramatically, seeing what the struggle after his death for human rights and justice looked like for common Filipinos. It then was the experience of seeing this drama of choices also played out in the violence of police brutality here in the United States when I served in the U.S. Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division dealing with police brutality here in the United States. And there, I can assure you there's nothing brutal and ugly that takes place over there that does not take place somewhere here in our own communities. Then in 1994, I was put on loan to the United Nations to direct the UN's genocide investigation just weeks after the end of the genocide in Rwanda. And there I was introduced to what it is that human beings do when all the controls are taken off, when human beings get to do what they really want to do to their neighbors. And now, after experiencing this sort of cataclysmic violence, it's now everyday violence against the poor that has been the preoccupation of my work. As Hillary suggested, an international justice mission, we seek to serve and protect the poor from violence in some of the poorest communities around the world. We have about 700 full-time staff in 18 different offices around the world. These are overwhelmingly 96% local, indigenous professionals who are criminal investigators and lawyers and social workers and advocates, and they take on very specific cases of abuse, violent oppression, and abuse of common poor people. The big categories of violence are gender violence, which, as you may know, accounts for more death and disability for women and girls between the age of 14 and 44 than cancer, malaria, car accidents, and war combined. This isn't the everyday violence against the poor. It's gender violence. It's also forced labor. You and I live in an era in which there are more people in slavery than any other time in human history. Approximately 30 million people are held in slavery today. My colleagues and I have met thousands of them by name. The other category of horrific abuse, everyday violence against the poor is police abuse. The World Bank documents that common poor people run away from the police to be safe rather than to the police. And finally, violent land theft. The way that the poor are not secure in the land because more powerful people can simply come and steal it and take it away, especially widows. Widows who in the developing world support 500 million orphans. So now this is the world in which I am engaged with International Justice Mission and helping support and encourage these teams. And that whole experience has now come together in a book which we just published in February at Oxford University Press called The Locust Effect: Why the End of Poverty Requires the End of Violence. My mother will be very pleased if you all buy it. But the point here is that this has just been my experience of immersion into this struggle against violence and injustice. And to look at the drama of human choices in the midst of that. So out of this immersion in the historic global struggle against the brutal violence of injustice, I'd like to put forth the following thesis. If the contemporary university aspires to be useful in helping students and citizens make good choices in the struggle for justice in the world, it must recover the pursuit of moral knowledge. If the contemporary university aspires to be useful in helping students and citizens make good choices in the struggle for justice in the world, it must recover the pursuit of moral knowledge. Let me try to perhaps unpack this argument with some care. First, let me concede that nothing about my argument will be the least bit interesting to those who have no interest in the predicate aspiration. That is, the aspiration that the university should help students and citizens make good choices in the struggle for justice in the world. Some may find this aspiration uninteresting because they don't believe human beings actually make choices about such things. Or they don't believe that there is any noble difference between bad choices and good choices. Or they don't believe that human choices actually matter. There simply is not an occasion here to address these objections meaningfully. And in any case, while I've heard such things sound quite clever in graduate school seminar rooms, I've never heard them sound clever or even remotely interesting while standing in a masquerade at a memorial at Auschwitz or in a trauma ward for victims of torture or sexual assault. I'm going to assume that most of us would want Dartmouth and other great universities of our era to help students and citizens make good choices in the struggle for justice in the world. And with that shared aspiration, I want to assert that to do so, the university must recover the pursuit of moral knowledge. Well, what exactly is moral knowledge? Moral knowledge is an aspect of our understanding of reality. At the broadest and most fundamental level, our understanding of what is real might be called, of course, our worldview. Everyone has a worldview. That is a working understanding of what is real. Having a view of reality is unavoidable. Whenever we act in reference to a view of reality. One cannot opt out of having a view of reality. One can only try to have one that accords with what is real. One may wish not to take a position on reality, but that can be accommodated only if one never wants to do anything. As soon as one wants to do something, one must act on the basis of one's view of what is real. And whether one's worldview accords with reality is extremely important because sooner or later, reality wins. The very best illustration of this for me has always been the sliding glass door. You may think that the door is open because it seems to be open, or because you want it to be open, because you assume it to be open, or because others have told you that it is open. But if the door is actually closed, reality is going to win. Now, I thought I'd drive home to this point with the indispensable teaching tool of